Okay, so we are live. A small group today, but a strong group today, as always. If any of you are live streaming, you want to join us in person on Zoom, we would love to have you. We are, as usual, going to continue with our learning through the teachings of Rabbi Aaron Smokler and the Sfat Emet. So today's no different. Let's begin with our bracha to begin our learning. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So that blessing reminds us of something profound. It reminds us that Torah study is an essential part of what it means to be a Jewish person. The Hebrew word esek is business, from la'asok, to engage in or to busy ourselves with. And we should always try to find a way to engage ourselves and busy ourselves with the study of Torah. And I say that because Lauren, who is with us this afternoon, is actually in Alaska right now. She just shared with us a little while ago. And she's in between transitioning to get onto her cruise ship. And she figured she had a little bit of time, so why not do a little bit of learning? And Lauren, I think that is so indicative of how we should approach the study of Torah. That when we have a little bit of time, we should engage and use that time to learn some Torah. So kol hakavod to you, and of course to Bob and Judy, who are our regulars. All right, I am going to share my screen. Hold on. So today's texts, let me share them, look a little bit different than what we have done in the past because, hold on a second. Give my computer a minute to catch up. Okay, there we go. Normally what happens is Rabbi Smokler takes a passage from the Torah portion and finds a Sfat Emet that fits with that Torah portion. But this week she did something a little bit differently. This week she was so overcome by the events that were transpiring in America. Lauren, do you mind if you mute yourself? Because there is background. Thank you so much. And when you're ready to speak, just open up the mute. Thank you. She was struck by the tragedy that took place in Texas, when she wrote this a week and a half ago. And that was hanging heavily on her mind. And I think she was feeling that there's so much good in our country and there's so much work that needs to be done. And just as that is the case with our country, so that is the case with all things. That there is a way of being in this world where we never feel like we are finished. That the job that we have in front of us is to work towards completion. But there's no such a thing as completion. Because to be complete is really to be dead. To be alive is to know and recognize that we are a work in progress, that the world in which we live is a work in progress, and it is our obligations and our responsibility to improve ourselves as we improve the world. And so she titles this class, I don't know if she titled it or I at least framed it the way that I think she wanted it to be framed, which is the task of becoming. And in it, she brings to bear a teacher of hers, a teacher of hers, so to speak, when she was finishing her work in college. And so she writes, and you can see the text, right? Can all of you see the text? Okay, so she writes, I was obsessed with the Danish philosopher Soren Kierkegaard during my college years and beyond. I wrote my ever so serious senior thesis on his work. I went to graduate school to devour more of it. His combination of religious passion, existential angst, and emotional intensity gripped me. He was a Christian thinker who seemed to articulate beautifully the audaciously the language of my Jewish soul. Among other things, Kierkegaard was obsessed with the importance of becoming a Christian. He argued that the task of the religious life was to recognize that one is ever in process, ever striving, and thus to be a Christian as a matter of course would be a stagnant failure. One must constantly be becoming. So the way we're going to look at our learning today is to try to frame what's the difference between being a Jew and becoming a Jew. And is there a difference? And do you ever think about that difference in terms of how you live your life and what you do on a daily basis? So she chooses for us a Sfat Emet, which provides and presents this kind of dichotomy between being a Jew and becoming a Jew. So we begin. In Ethics of Our Fathers, it says, Moses received the Torah at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders to the prophets, and the prophets to the men of the great assembly. So there's a passage in the very beginning of Pirkei Avot, the first chapter in Pirkei Avot, that suggests any number of ideas. The way in which it's often read is that our tradition is an oral tradition. God gave the Torah to Moshe. Moshe received that Torah and handed it, passed it on, transmitted it to Joshua, to the elders, all the way down to us. So what does that mean practically? It means that our Jewish knowledge comes from those who came before us. We are a people of receiving Torah, and that's where the Sfat Emet begins. But, he says, wasn't the Torah given to all Israel? Why does it say Moses received the Torah at Sinai and then transmitted it to Joshua? We know there's a tradition that says, and the Torah itself says, that God came down Mount Sinai and gave the Torah to all the people. In fact, there are many midrashim that say that each one of us who was present at Sinai in that moment received the Torah in our own special and unique way. So then why does Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, say Moses is the one who received the Torah? Why doesn't it say all of Israel received the Torah? And if all of Israel received the Torah, then there would be no need for Moses to transmit it to Joshua, to the elders, and to everybody else, because everybody would have received it. Everybody would have received it equally. So then he answers his own question. He says, well, there are two pathways to Torah. One is through exertion, yigia, which anyone can access at their own level of understanding. But there is another special way into Torah available only to sages and leaders of a generation, which is not attained through human intelligence. It is an inheritance, a Yerusha, given to us. As it is written, Moses charged us with the teaching, an inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. Therefore, trust in sages is a foundation of Torah. Okay, pause. And let's see if we can understand what it is that Sfat Emet is saying. So, what do you think he's saying here? There's two ways in which we receive the Torah. What are the two ways that we receive the Torah? One he calls exertion, yigia, and the other one he calls an inheritance, Yerusha. What do you think he means by those two definitions. What is implied in exertion versus inheritance? Yes, Judy. You're all, because there's only a few of you today, when I ask questions, unfortunately, you can't rely on others in the class to answer the questions. So you're stuck having to be a little bit more participatory than you might normally want to be.
Well, I
Judy.
think exertion is when you study and learn it, and the other way is inheriting it when it just comes naturally to you. Like most of the people in these groups, that's what I think they have, and I have exertion.
Well, I don't know if I would agree with your last comment. I think that there may be people in the study groups that you study with who may have more years of experience in studying Torah, but I'm not so sure that it doesn't come with just as much exertion as you put forward. But I think you said something very important. Clearly, when we have to exert in order to gain something, um, right? There's sweat and toil and labor involved in whatever it is that we're acquiring. Judy, you have spent a great deal of time in the garden. We have a community vegetable garden, and we grow vegetables that we then hand over to a shelter to feed those who have less. And the garden doesn't grow by itself. I mean, it's true that there are all sorts of fruit trees that we might have in our backyard that were planted by people that came before us that with very little work on our part produce fruit year after year. And there's very little that we have to do other than maybe a little bit of pruning, a little bit of watering, and a little bit of feeding. But there are others gardens, especially that need to be tended, vegetable gardens, that will not grow by themselves, that require our intense effort. And I think that's the distinction. A Yerusha, an inheritance, we do nothing to receive. We just happen to be born into a family where somebody leaves us something, or we enter into a house and buy a house and the fruit trees are already there, right? There are so many examples that we can imagine of inheritance where we have to put out very little effort and the rewards might be very great. And so when it comes to receiving Torah, the Sfat Emet is saying, is it requires us to see both ways as ways in which we acquire Torah. We have to invest and exercise our conscious effort to study and learn and break our teeth over the meaning and understanding of Torah, which I think, Judy, you were alluding to before. And then there is something that just happens by being a Jew. What do you think that is? What is it? What is that? It just happens. What's the inheritance that we receive where we have to do nothing, but we receive it nevertheless? What would you say that is? Yeah, Judy.
Well, I was going to say before that I think that people who grow up in a Jewish family, a religious family, or very culturally Jewish, they just learn by being there, and that's kind of what I missed. And so catching up to that is hard, and I think that it's so important to bring up your kids with that kind of education, exposing them to all of it.
Okay, beautiful. So what I'm hearing you saying is the inheritance might be different for different people. For some people, the inheritance might be very rich. Um, People who grow up in a household filled with Jewish practice, Jewish customs, Jewish culture have to do very little in terms of exertion to gain understanding and knowledge of what it means to be a Jew. They grow up in a house. It was handed to them, so to speak, the way that Moses received the Torah at Sinai and handed it off to Joshua, to the elders and everybody else. It's handed to them on a silver platter, and they have very little to do. There are other people like you who grow up in a household where they're not given that inheritance. And therefore, you have to work hard to catch up to those who receive that inheritance. You have to study extra hard because you weren't given the tools, you weren't given the riches of our tradition. You've had to learn it much later. And we know that the later we in life, the more difficult it is to acquire new skills.
That's
Lauren.
Okay, I'll try to talk while it's quiet. I'm walking around the lobby to find a quiet spot. Like Judy, I was not raised with much of a religious background, much observances, and yet my parents expected me to marry a Jewish boy. Like, what background did they give me? I mean, I did marry a Jewish boy who grew into a Jewish man. and among my friends, some people think I'm the most religious person of my friends. And it's funny, I don't really know why. And they think it's awesome that I'm taking all these classes and I'm studying and I'm like Judy, trying to catch up. I mean, she and I sometimes sit in these classes and are in awe of how much knowledge that people have of the Bible and Bible people and people of the Bible and knowledge. And my parents gave me, by virtue of my birth, my religion, but they didn't do anything to ensure that would go on. And yet that was my inheritance. It wasn't my, so what was the other thing? How hard you have to work to keep it is how hard you have to work to keep it. I mean, I was, in the generation, well, girls didn't need a religious education. You're a girl, you don't need a religious education. And I wanted one so badly, but I was a girl. I got one later on in life and Judy and I became B'nai Mitzvahs together. Mitzvot together. I don't know. Just because you're born a Jew doesn't mean you know anything about being Jewish.
Okay, beautiful. So you in your own life feel this tension between exertion and inheritance, and recognize that if the inheritance is a much stronger inheritance, then the exertion may come with a little bit less labor and toil.
Right.
Bob, you are the example of also, I think, of not receiving the inheritance because you came to Judaism of your own free will much later in life. And therefore, the inheritance wasn't there for you because you joined into the faith.
And a lot of
And I got to tell you, lacking that inheritance actually had an impact.
What do you mean?
Well, not having any Judaic influence in my past, I had to find it. And the only way I could find it was through study and associating with other Jews. So I had an inheritance, it just wasn't very worthwhile.
Judy, what were you going to say?
pretty much what Bob said, that the people I know who have converted, they seem so much more dedicated or don't want to say religious, but that's part of it.
Maybe instead of religious, maybe we can say serious about what they've
Committed.
taken upon themselves.
Yeah.
That when they've chosen it freely, they don't want to squander that which they've chosen. And so they make a more intentional effort to understand and participate and learn.
Maybe Lauren and I should convert.
Well, I think, look, the very essence of our discussion is going to lead to just that. That, in a sense, all of us, regardless of whether we inherited nothing, a little, or a lot, still have to approach our life as Jews as one that requires a certain amount of exertion and effort. And we can't rest on our laurels regardless of what we have inherited. So let's continue with the Svat Emet. Look at the second paragraph of his. The Talmud states, do not read it as inheritance. Don't read the word morasha as inheritance. Rather read it as betrothed. Me'orasa. So the Svat Emet is playing with the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word for inheritance is Yerusha. And he's reading the word Yerusha, instead of reading it as a shin, he's reading it as a sin, Yerusa. And Yerusa is a different Hebrew word. It means to get married, to be betrothed. And what's the difference between inheritance and Yerusa? Well, we all know that marriage requires work. Marriage requires exertion. So he says, in an inheritance, there is no interruption. It just passes from one generation to another in perpetuity. But betrothal is a close relationship that comes from human activity and exertion. That's why Pirkei Avot says to every individual, make yourself fit to study Torah, for it will not be yours by inheritance. That is, it will not be yours individually by inheritance. Only for the collective of Israel is the Torah described as an inheritance of the congregation. But if a person joins themselves to the collective, right, they can merit to be part of the inheritance too, but that doesn't deny the need to have exertion. So going back, it doesn't matter what our inheritance was. It doesn't matter what we got from our families. It doesn't matter that we all stood at Mount Sinai and received the Torah from God. All that matters is that we do the work necessary to make that inheritance into something meaningful, into something that shows our commitment to the learning. So, right, I asked the question, then what's the difference, to frame this again in the conversation that I want, what's the difference between being a Jew and becoming a Jew? I think being a Jew is standing at Sinai and receiving the Torah. Or being a Jew is deciding I'm going to convert to Judaism and then going to the mikveh. But that's not what it means to become a Jew. What it means to become a Jew is to never take for granted whatever inheritance we've received and to do the work necessary to make that Torah ours and not just a gift that somebody gave us. And that's what I think Rabbi Smokler says here. To be a Jew, on the one hand, is to be a passive recipient of the Torah. It is to inherit an identity, to be born or opt into a history. So that covers, right, Lauren, Judy, and you, Bob, whether you were born into it or you opt into it. You are at some moment a passive recipient of that Torah. It is not willed, it is not earned, it is not worked for. It's simply a state of being. But pathway 2 is the path of yigiyah, exertion. This one requires appropriation and personalization. This one requires conscious effort, each one according to their level of understanding. So I would invite you to, ask the question or answer the question, when have you just been a Jew? And when have you acted in a way that reflects becoming a Jew? What are the ways that you become a Jew? And what are the ways in your life in the past or even in the present where you're just a Jew without any work? How do you exert yourself to strive to constantly become a Jew? What are the things that you do in daily, weekly, monthly, yearly practices? Judy?
I think when I woke up to become a Jew was when I had kids, and it became important to me to raise them Jewish and expose them to the holidays and everything like that. And then when I discovered Melton, that, added to it a lot. I became a bat mitzvah in between them, but even that wasn't as meaningful as Melton was.
Right.
And
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is the motivation of having to be responsible for others who were inheriting their Jewish identity led you to say it's not enough for my children to be born to a Jewish mother and a Jewish father. I have to work in order to help them understand this gift of inheritance. I have to do things to show them and to model in my life what it means for them, hopefully, to be Jewish. And then you double down at some point on that by becoming an adult bat mitzvah and taking advantage of some of the wonderful learning that we have offered in our community in the Melton School by increasing the amount of knowledge that you have so that you can more fully understand what the gift of your inheritance was.
And the fourth thing was during COVID, becoming more active in learning with the temple. And that has had a huge impact on me too.
Okay, so you started for your kids, you went on to do something for yourself, you then expanded and doubled down on your own learning with Melton, and then you doubled down again by involving yourself in a Jewish community and taking advantage of both the things that we offer and contribute back to the well-being of the synagogue community. Beautiful. Bob, what about you?
Well, I view the word Jew as, from a linguistic standpoint, as a noun, where one becomes a Jew by joining a faith or a peoplehood. But Jew is also a verb in that Judaism is a religion of action for me. And becoming a Jew then is putting my Jewish theology into action to better the world and to better understand Judaism. Taking classes, sure, but also doing good works. Very much is becoming a Jew.
Okay, beautiful. So, to be a Jew is not simply to rest on one's laurels of what it is that they have inherited or what it is they have learned. But learning requires action. And in fact, there's a debate in the Talmud that that ask the question, what's more important, study or action? And one position is action, another position is study, but only study if it leads to action. Study for the sake of studying alone is not articulating the fullness of what it means to be a Jew. So for you, Bob, your learning always has to be transformed into, right, application in the world to improve self, community, and the world around you. That's how you are becoming a Jew in this world. Very nice. Lauren, did you want to add?
Well, I'm similar to Judy. You know, when we had children, we joined a temple right away. I joined Mommy and Me classes. I sent them to Jewish preschools. They went to Hebrew school. They were confirmed. They both went to Israel. Michael was in a Jewish fraternity. I thought for sure he would marry a Jewish girl, which he did not. But then she she converted, and she teaches at a Jewish preschool.
Nice.
She's more of a Jewish girl than if he had married a Jewish girl, and she became a Jew before they had children. So certainly my grandchildren are Jewish. You know, and it's interesting when you say, like Judy said, that, you know, she went against the family, but I think it was difficult for her parents. You know, I don't think I would have been as gracious if Michael came to, not that he would have, but if he had said, you know, I'm going to become Catholic, you know, they would have found me. I always said, well, where's Lauren? Oh, she's hanging up by the cross next to Christ. I mean, I don't think I would have been as gracious about it if he had converted to Christianity. And yet her parents, because they had a Jewish wedding, they got married by a cantor rabbi. I mean, they signed the ketubah. It was a Jewish. If they had gotten married by a priest, I don't even know if I could have been at the wedding. And yet her parents and her mother said to me when she was welcomed at Temple Judea after her conversion, she said to me, well, I couldn't lose my daughter. I had to be able to accept this. And, you know, she has Jewish grandchildren. I think that's lovely. I don't know. She's a bigger person than I would have been. So when Judy said, you know, also having grandchildren and doing Shabbat with them. And even the baby now, who's 18 months old, knows enough when she hears the blessing, she covers her eyes. And that's I can't even tell you how that fills my heart, because I did not grow up with that. So, you know, and doing Passover, and that Brianna and her mother have done Seders together. Her mother, who was raised Catholic, and the father is a deacon, that, you know, it's just, how do I feel as a Jew? That's how I feel as a Jew.
So,
you know?
So again, if I can reiterate, so for Lauren, what it means to become a Jew is to recognize that the journey is not just yours.
No.
The journey is one that is deeply connected to the people in your life. And
Yes.
that your goal in becoming a Jew is to help other people, whether it's your children or your grandchildren or their spouses or their families, join you on this constant world of discovery. That in your becoming a Jew, you are helping others understand more deeply the inheritance that they have, in the hopes that they will also become a Jew in the process.
Right now, and then the funny thing is, so we're on this trip, and we're with my cousin and her husband. I said, so let's find all the Jews on the, and you know, how do you always know who the Jews are? You could just spot them, and we're all wearing masks. It's not like, but you just know who the Jews are. How do you know who the Jews are? How do
We
you find
know
it?
you were.
What?
We
I
would
just-
know you were.
You would know, you just know who they are. It's not like we're all praying and we're all davening, but there's just this essence about a Jewish person that just shines through. It's a riot. I don't know.
That's true.
It's just a funny thing.
George, what about you? The question is, now I know you
a little
came
bit late.
I know you came in a little
Yeah.
bit late, but to summarize, we inherit our Judaism as a Yerusha
Yeah.
simply by being born into the Jewish faith
Oh.
or by converting to the Jewish faith.
Okay.
But that's not enough, because we need to look at that inheritance, not as an inheritance, but as a betrothal, in a sense that we need to struggle with it. We need to make exertion and effort towards our Judaism, so that there's a difference between being a Jew and becoming a Jew. Becoming a Jew is, as Bob and Judy and Lauren said, constantly learning and applying that which you're learning to the world and to your relationships with other people. What would you say, if you were to think about it in this frame? What are the ways in which you have continued to become a Jew in your life? That it wasn't enough for you, George, just to be born Jewish. That for you, it's been a constant journey of becoming Jewish throughout your many years.
Okay. I'll give you my background. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear
Okay,
you
good.
fine.
I grew up in a small town in Iowa, and I noticed, this before my time, but, people came from Europe with a good background, but over time, it depreciated, like in accounting, all that. And if you don't, bring more into it over time, it dissolves. And maybe a few generations later, nobody knows anything. Okay, so that's what's going on. Then I noticed a strong Catholic population. I said, wait a second, how come they're doing so well? Well, first of all, they had a lot of kids. And secondly, they believed in this stuff. So I said, wait a second, they're succeeding and we're dissolving. Okay. And then I looked at, you say, this Yerusha, well, what I tell people today, I study in the morning. So what are you doing? And I said, I'm regaining my inheritance. So what are you doing? Talking to lawyers and accountants? No, I'm, studying Torah and Gomorrah, and all that sort of thing. Because I want to put in more than I take out. Okay, make it bigger. Because I want this thing to keep going. We have this wonderful thing, and we're just throwing it away.
Okay,
and it's a tragedy.
Can I pause that? You just said something so, everything you said is really beautiful,
Whatever.
like everything that, Lauren, Bob, and Judy said. But I just want to hold on to that idea because I think it's such a profoundly important idea, George. You said, and I wish I remembered exactly the way you said it, but every morning you learn traditional Jewish life because you do not want to waste your inheritance. You do not want to throw away your inheritance. It's too precious to you. And so you want to reinvest in that inheritance.
And make it grow and then spread it out, spread it to other
beautiful
people, which includes all kinds of things. But and everything I do isn't obvious. For example, I'm working on Yom, the Yom Kippur in the Talmud. And they're talking about the priest, with these sacrifices, his bull. Does he, what does he do? How much? This isn't practical. It's not something I'm going to go out and, but it's all part of the package. And you don't know when something's going to come in. That's the other part. and the thing is, it's fun. It's actually fun, but you got to get into it.
Well, I certainly hope that if I do believe, and I think that, Lauren and Judy, and to a certain extent, Bob, are examples of what you mean when you say that when you invest in it, you realize the rewards are so great. You realize that the benefit of the investment pays off, not just for yourself, but as you said, Bob, for all others, it grows. And Lauren was very specific. Her grandchildren, her son-in-law.
We have a duty to make it carry on.
Exactly.
They want people to stop with us, this great inheritance, just throw it away, which again, the previous rabbi at the synagogue, since it's only one, Rabbi Shochet says, and he was quoting somebody from his rabbinical class, some scholar. It might have been Heschel or one of them. He said, the Jews are like the messenger who have forgotten the message. They have this message to bring to the world and they don't know what it is.
And that's the point of what the Sfat Emet is trying to remind us. The Sfat Emet is trying to remind us that it's not enough just to say,
Yeah.
I'm a Jew.
No.
That's not good enough.
Better
Because
than zero, but
exactly,
got a
because
ways to go.
that's all we do is say we're a Jew, and we do
Yeah.
not exert and recognize the responsibility that comes with being a Jew,
Yeah.
then we throw it away.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Judy.
It makes me sad to hear that because, and it's true, but two of my grandkids are not being raised Jewish, and they're not being raised anything except to live a good ethical life, which is really important. But it's all on me and Gil, and we try, but still.
Well, I want to, I look, reality is such that we have very limited control over anybody other than ourselves, right? That's the reality. And the only thing that we can do sometimes is hopefully be role models. So the more that you and Gil do in terms of your commitment to your faith will hopefully be seen and at some point understood by your grandchildren, that they in time may want to emulate. No guarantee, right? We don't know. But the more committed you are, and the two of you are very committed, the more active you are, and you're very active, the more public you are of those things that are important to you, to your children and grandchildren, they see that, they recognize that, and
Rabbi,
hopefully that will translate.
you
Yeah,
don't know.
George.
You don't know who you're going to influence. It's not
Exactly.
even thinking of. That somebody said, "Hey, this is a good idea." Picking up on it and going with it.
Yeah, at some point in their life, they may,
Or
as
anybody
adults.
else. I'm just saying other people too.
Oh, for sure, for
They come in
sure,
and
other
say,
people.
"Hey, this is great. This is a good idea."
For sure. There's no question for sure other people. But even those in our immediate family who are disconnected, we have influence over them in ways that we don't even realize we have influence. And, they may find their way to Judaism and remember and recall in some, future moment something that their grandmother did or said, or something they experienced at their grandparents' house that gave them the kind of feeling that encouraged them to do a little bit of exploration on their own. So let's finish the last piece. I'm going to share my screen once again. Okay, so Rabbi Smokler concludes, for the Sfat Emet, for him, we are both Yorshim, meaning inheritors, and Yigiim, exerters, receivers of a profound gift and active cultivators of it. Torah is both a morasha and a meorasa. We are bound to it as a group, and we bind ourselves to it individually, consciously, each in our own way. We are always being and always becoming, retaining our innate identities while at the same time actively shaping them. So, I think what the lesson is for today is how can we, and again, I'm preaching to the choir here in talking to all of you and to those who are going to be watching this video a little bit later. The very fact that you're watching it and that you're currently here is a statement of your understanding that you have to actively cultivate your inheritance. Because only in actively cultivating your inheritance do you understand the profound gift of your inheritance. So all I say is let us continue to find the courage, the strength, the wisdom, and the enjoyment in cultivating our inheritance so that it can be, and we can be, influences for all those who live in our lives and come after us when we are no longer here. So a couple of housekeeping items, just very briefly. We are going to continue with class next week and on the 23rd. And I believe, no, I can say with certainty, the 23rd of June is going to be our last class until we pick up again at some point in August or September. So we're going to take a break. We have Lunch and Learn next week and the week afterwards. And then we are going to take a break and pick up again, at some point towards the end of summer. Okay?
And
All-
when is Musar starting?
So it's going to probably not begin until after the holidays. I think I'm scheduling it for the end of October, the beginning of November. And it will be a 6-week trial class for people who have never done Musar. And then we'll continue beyond that for those who are interested. Lauren, can't hear you. You're muted.
What happens if you've tried it, but you want to try it again?
You're always welcome to come back.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you all for your participation, and thanks, Lauren, for being here.
I don't know if I'll be here next week, but I'll let you know.
Well, enjoy the cruise.
Thank you.
Uh,
All right. Have a good one, everyone.